So today we're doing Isaiah chapter 10, but I'm going to wander around a little bit getting there. You know, Isaiah is done by a prophet. You know what the difference is between prophets and priests, for example. You know, priests speak to God on behalf of the people. Prophets speak to the people on behalf of God. And so the only thing is, sometimes they're talking in a language that you really got to read it carefully to understand what is it that they're saying. And I had a little trouble myself, so I had to make myself some notes. So this little thing here is just to help me not get lost along the way. And I actually am letting you see some of the pictures. Don't worry about the pictures except when we get to maps. That's what I really put that up there for. When we get to some maps, you might want to know what are we talking about? Where is this going on at? But you don't have to worry about the words. Just open up to Isaiah 10. You can read them there. So it's talking about God's judgment on Assyria. But, you know, along the way, Isaiah's talking about some judgment on Israel too. And some judgment coming up on Judah. So I thought as a little background, you know, if you want to, the prophecy stuff is kind of tough to pull out there, or at least it is for me. But if you want to just look at the history about what is going on, go back and look at 2 Kings chapter 7, and they kind of lay out the history of what is going on at the time Isaiah is doing chapter 10. And so I just extracted a few little things out of that. And for example, here it kind of deals with the question, why was God upset with Israel and Judah? And he said the Israelites secretly did things. This is in 2 Kings 17. In verse 9, the Israelites secretly did things against the Lord their God that were not right. They built themselves high places in all their towns. They did wicked things. They worshipped idols. The Lord had said, you shall not do this. The Lord warned Israel and Judah through all his prophets and seers, turn from your evil ways. And continuing on, you know, the question is, well, God says this, and he says it through his prophets. So do the people of Israel listen? Well, no. Let's see. In verse 14, in 2 Kings, says, but they would not listen. They followed worthless idols and themselves became worthless. They imitated the nations around them, although the Lord had ordered them, do not do as they do. They forsook all the commands of the Lord, and they worshipped Baal. Remember Baal? Who was that famous prophet that went around and had all the trouble, but you know, lighting the fires, you know, and dealing. Who was it? Elijah. Yeah, Elijah. I think he was dealing with those prophets, and he had a bunch of them killed. So he says they forsook all the commands of the Lord, and they worshiped Baal. They sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. Remember Molech and the idols that were there? People thought, you know, we'll win things by sacrificing our children. We would never do that in America, would we? Okay. They said, unless we're talking about maybe abortion or something. They sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire. They practiced divination and sought omens and sold themselves to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because it kind of sets the tone for what is Isaiah talking about in chapter 10. He is telling these people, you've done wrong, and these are the things they did wrong. So what did God do about them continuing to do bad things? So it says in verse 18 in 2 Kings, so the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. So just one little bit of history. So how did God punish Israel? And Israel is the name of the northern kingdom. Remember, there's two kingdoms that made up all the people in the Holy Land there. There was Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And Israel, the people in Israel moved their capital to Samaria up in the northern part. And at the time of Isaiah, there was a king there in Israel in the northern part, and his name was Hosea. And I've got a little stuff here about him. And this is in that period, you know, 730, 720 BC. That's when Isaiah is operating. Isaiah starts in about 740 BC, and he goes for about 60 years. 60 years through a lot of kings. only one or two kings here of Israel, and all the rest of them were kings of Judah. But he was really a prophet to the people in Judah. So Hosea, the king in Israel, had made a deal. Let me just take a step back. Israel was worried about Assyria. Assyria was out taking over everything, and the people in Israel were worried about it. So they thought the way to protect themselves was to try and buy their way out of the problem. And so they started paying tribute to the king of Assyria. The guy's name was Shalmaneser. But after a while, they got tired of paying the debt, and they wanted to get out of it. So they started to make a deal with the king of Egypt about, why don't we just not do this anymore? We'll share the money ourselves or do something else. And in order to avoid paying tribute, he starts making this plan. Well, guess what? Like every gossipy thing that goes on in the world, the word leaks out, and Shalmaneser finds out about it, that these guys are making a deal, and he decides he's just going to come in and take over the northern kingdom, and he does. He comes in, takes it over, and when he does, that's the end of Israel. That's the end of Samaria, the northern kingdom. When I say Israel, I'm talking about the northern kingdom, okay, which is capital is in Samaria, in the northern part. Shalmaneser came down, he attacked Samaria, he imprisoned Hosea. Hosea was the last king of Israel, the northern kingdom. He deported the Israelites to Assyria, and he resettled Samaria with people from Babylon. You know, that was kind of the way these guys did things. Even later on, when the Babylonians come into Judah, they do that. They come in, they take over the country, and then to keep them from coming up and fomenting rebellion, let's just haul them off and put them somewhere else, where they don't know each other, where they can't get together and make friends and decide they will rebel anymore. Let's just separate them, isolate them, and we'll come back in and populate the country with our good folks, or whatever. So, the impact on Samaria. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kulath, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim. Afghanists could probably pronounce this better than me. And settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in its towns. So the northern kingdom is now populated with people, not even your normal Hebrew people anymore. It's populated with people that came out from the other side of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers that have been pulled in. A different kind of background, a different kind of culture. And these are the people that are kind of forming the basis of the population in the northern kingdom area. And later on, is there any question about why people didn't want to deal with Samaritans later on in Jesus' time? It's because they're different. They're different kind of people after all this has gone on. What about Judah? Only the tribe of Judah was left, and this is still in Kings. And even Judah did not keep the commands of the Lord their God. They followed the practices Israel had introduced. Therefore, the Lord rejected all the people of Israel. And here we're talking about the greater Israel, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So God said, hey, neither one of them are doing right. And therefore, he's rejecting them all. Here's something, y'all can look at this later if you want to, but it's just something that kind of shows who is king during the period of Isaiah. And I kind of showed down on the bottom row there that Isaiah, what I did is broke that calendar up into little 10-year increments, that Isaiah goes all the way from around 740 to somewhere around 680. That puts him through a lot of different kings, and you can look and see who the kings of Judah were and who the kings of Israel were. And you notice that after Hosea, it's black up there because there are no more kings of Israel after 721. Because Israel is done. It's Assyria then. Assyrians take it over. You don't have to memorize this, but if you want it later, I will be glad to email you this slide package. Beg your pardon? Okay. Okay. Now, finally, chapter 10 of Isaiah. And let's see how it starts out. Verse 1, woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. So one of my questions was, who's doing the talking here? Who is this talking? Well, it's Isaiah, but he's talking, remember? He's talking for God. He's telling the people. He's the guy who's imparting to the people what God is saying. And that is what God is saying. Woe to these people who essentially are not looking after widows and orphans. It's a big deal. I mean, he cited these two examples, but there's probably a whole lot of other things, to include making sacrifices of your children, that he could have pointed out. So in there he says, what will you do in the day of reckoning when disaster comes from afar? So that raises the question, what is this day of reckoning? What is the impending disaster that Isaiah is alluding to? Well, if you see in the dark green area there, that's kind of what what Assyria looks like. And it's pretty big. It's covering a lot of territory, but that's in this is at the time of Isaiah. But if you see that little red border line that goes around there, that over the next 100 years, Assyria is going to grow to fill all of that. They're on the move. They're on the move, and it's pretty clear to everybody who's picking up the Orange County Register over there that Assyria is on the move. They're going to be taking over everything, that we probably all need to be worried about what's going on. So this day of reckoning. You know, anybody been to Germany? You all know when you get ready for the bill, you say Die Rechnung. Die Rechnung? That's how you say the bill. I'm ready for the bill at the end of your meal. You know, it's the reckoning. That's where they get that from, the reckoning. Little side thing, you don't have to pay extra for that. Day of reckoning, what happens then? To whom? So Isaiah is saying, when this happens, when you see these Assyrians coming, to whom will you run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Nothing will remain but to cringe among the captives or fall among the slain. He's saying, hey, we're running out of options here. You know, I was thinking as I read that, you know how the pastor's always talking about when you get ready to go to a funeral service or something, that you don't see a lot of people with the U-Haul behind them taking all their riches with them to go down to the memorial service. It's not going to go with you. And what Isaiah is pointing out here is that you're not going to take your riches. It's all going to be gone. So what are you left with? He says, you know, we saw this stuff, and even if you do fall down and you kind of give a little humility for the Assyrian king who's coming in and slaughtering everybody, will this satisfy him? Will it satisfy the... And what Isaiah says, nope, all of this supposed stuff you guys are doing to humble yourselves before the Assyrian king, it's not going to work. Yet for all this, his anger, meaning the Assyrian king's anger, is not turned away. His hand is still upraised. As you read through Isaiah, and when you do it on your own, you'll kind of be wondering, who's he talking about frequently? Is it God talking, or is it him talking, or is he talking about the Assyrian king? And it does go back and forth quite often, and you have to really think about who it is that's talking at the time. But here, when he's talking, he's saying his anger, meaning the Assyrian's king anger, is not turned away by you guys giving up and lying down on the street and pretending to be humble. You know, I showed the map a little earlier. Well, this one is more about 100-year span here, 150-year span. The dark green was that part I had on the previous thing showing where Assyria was in, say, the 800s. And then the light green shows you what they went on to accomplish by 671 BC. They took over everything. Egypt, you know, everything. Iraq, everything. They didn't get to Afghanistan, by the way. But they did take over a lot of places out there. Is the Assyrian king about to slow down or stop his conquest? Remember, when that question is being asked, they're in the dark green area. But you can see they're not staying in the dark green area. They're going to go and they're going to take over the whole Middle East area. What is Assyria's real role? Well, Assyria thinks their role is to conquer the world. You know, there are a lot of people and a lot of countries that take on that mission every now and then. But That's not what God says. He says that Assyria is a tool. And he puts it in verse 5 there where he says, "Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger." What he is pointing out is that Assyria is God's tool to do what? To punish the Israelites for all the bad things they've done. So, to punish Israel for its disobedience, he's going to use the Assyrian king. And he's going to kind of cut him loose and let him go and take over everything, which, you could see from those maps, he essentially does. "I send him against a godless nation. I dispatch him against the people who anger me, to seize, loot, and snatch plunder, and to trample them down like mud in the streets." Because God really wanted to humble the Israelites because they had been living back there on their little fortunes and their riches and thinking the world, everything was rosy. And he thought it's time for them to get a little dose of reality when you keep turning to things like the Assyrian king to help you, when who should they really be turning to? To God. That's what God really wanted. He wanted the people to turn to him. But is God happy with this tool? I said the Assyrian king was his tool, but is he happy with the tool? Well, Isaiah says, for God, but this is not what he, the Assyrian king, intends. He's not out there doing what God wanted him to, punishing the Israelites. He's out there trying to make himself wealthy and to conquer territory and to destroy other nations, like he just did with Samaria and the northern kingdom. He replaces the people, puts his own folks in there. So his motivation is not exactly what God wanted as an outcome out of this. Not that God didn't anticipate it. God's smarter than that. But he's not happy with the Assyrians. That's the point. The Assyrians are his tool, but he's not happy with them. The Assyrian king boasts, "Are not my commanders all kings?" And they were. As he took over these countries, he took over the militaries in these other places and gave them responsibilities. He's loaded with high-powered people to run his army, and they've been out there attacking places everywhere. And he cites a whole bunch of names there in Isaiah chapters 9, for example. "Has not Calno fared like Carchemish? Is not Hamath like Arpad?" And what he's talking about are cities that have been completely destroyed by the Assyrians. He's gone in there and he's taken them over. And what he's saying is, Israel, you're next. And you know what? Those were hard cities to take over, but we did it. We did it, and it was child's play. It was child's play, and you know what? And it was harder to take care of them than it's going to be to take care of Jerusalem and the cities in Samaria. As he says, "Shall I not deal with Jerusalem and her images as I dealt with Samaria and her idols?" In the little map, I was trying to show you where some of those names are, but they're all the way up closer to Turkey, northern Syria. Probably if y'all were reading the newspaper, you probably heard of the town of Aleppo, which is up there north, way up in the north. But you can see a lot of these cities that he's called out here are up in that area, way up the coastline, above Lebanon. So, verse 12, let's see. "When the Lord has finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say," and this is Isaiah saying that. He's saying that God says, "I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and the haughty look in his eyes. For he says," meaning the king of Assyria says, "By the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, because I have understanding." This is the king of Assyria. I think we've got a little lack of humility here, right? He's taking all the credit upon himself. And for those of you who are biblical scholars in here, you've heard that, when you start patting yourself on the back and forgetting that God helped you get there, God sometimes doesn't like that. And there's a price to be paid for that kind of attitude. So, while he's patted himself on the back here, he says, by the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, and because I have understanding, I removed the boundaries of nations, I plundered their treasures, like a mighty one, I subdued their kings. And that's all the king of Assyria saying that. He says, and he goes on to say, as one reaches into a nest, so my hand reached for the wealth of the nations. As people gather abandon eggs, so I gathered all the countries. Not one flapped a wing or opened its mouth to chirp. In other words, they just rolled over and let the king of Assyria take it all. Okay? But then, in verse 13, God steps in, because he's got something to say about this. He says, you've been out there boasting about what all you're doing, but let me give you this little example here. And he says, does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it? What he's trying to point out, and he has a couple of little examples there about, where he says, as if a rod were to wield the person who lifts it up. Or, for those of you who are modern day guys, when you're out there with a golf club, the number one wood or something like that, is it the golf club did the backstroke, or did you do it? And it kind of, God is saying, hey, king of Assyria, you're taking a lot of credit here for things, but it wasn't you, it was me. I have empowered you to do these things, but you're up. And his little example there about, does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it? No, king of Assyria, you didn't do it. I did it. And if that is confusing or I didn't explain it well, so be it, but I think you get the message. God will inflict justice on the Assyrians. That's where we're at. Therefore, and this is Isaiah, therefore the Lord, the Almighty, will send a wasting disease upon his sturdy warriors, meaning a king of Assyria's sturdy warriors. Under his pomp, fire will be kindled. And he goes on and on through this little thing saying the people are going to get sick. And he kind of describes the Assyrians as being like the trees in the forest, gobs of them. Everywhere you turn there, because he came in with these large armies, they're everywhere. And it was kind of like trees, many, many trees in the forest. And so he uses that example a lot. But what he's saying in this little section through verse 19 is that all of this is going to be burned up. It's all going to go away. The king of Assyria may be patting himself on the back with how wonderful things are, but it's not going to last. When God finally does a little something to settle with the king of Assyria, now keep in mind this is prophecy that it's going to happen. It hadn't happened yet. The king of Assyria is running loose out there. He's just having a great old time, and is going to for another 100 years at this particular time that Isaiah is talking about this. But Isaiah is saying that in the end, Israel is going to come back. In that day, after he's dealt with the king of Assyria and the Assyrians, after God has dealt with them, he says, in that day, the remnant of Israel, the survivors of Jacob, will no longer rely on him, the king of Syria, who struck them down, but will truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return. A remnant of Jacob will return to the mighty God. Boy, that remnant word, that's a good word. We hear about it periodically. But you know what? How big is a remnant? Let's see, what is it we think about the people of Israel? They're the chosen people, right? The chosen people. And if you're the chosen people, you think, oh, we're all going to be taken care of. But the reality of it is, the remnant is a small part of the population of Israel. They all got kind of deported. Some are going to come back. And it's not tomorrow they're coming back. Even Jeremiah said, you're going to be there for a while, after later on. But when they do come back, is it everybody coming back? No. They said that the population of Israel at this particular time was around about 100,000 people. And again, that's Google and some other folks saying that. It's an academic thing. And then they said, but after the return, not immediately after, but after people come back and get settled, it's around 30,000, like maybe 30% of the people finally return. The remnant is not all that big. So when you think about remnant, it's almost like somebody telling you, you you got several children, but one of them's going to survive. It's not a good deal. A remnant is a small portion of the people, but a remnant will return, and Isaiah is trying to point that out. Is that there will be people who come back, and they will return to Almighty God. Let's see. So I had a little statistics here. Though your people be like the sand of the sea, Israel, only a remnant will return. Destruction has been decreed. Okay, and this is God through Isaiah saying, destruction has been decreed. People are going to go away. The Lord Almighty will carry out the destruction decreed upon the whole land. But he said, it's not just you guys in Israel that are going to pay the price. The Assyrians are going to pay a price also. Therefore, this is what the Lord says, the Lord Almighty. My people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians, who beat you with a rod and lift up a club against you as Egypt did. He's trying to compare them. Well, he's trying to tell the Israelis they've been through this before with the Egyptians. Your history, the things that we talk about every year when we do our annual celebrations about leaving Egypt. It's the same kind of thing, but now it's the Assyrians who are doing it. Very soon my anger against you, meaning God's anger against Israel, will end, and my wrath will be directed to their, meaning the Assyrians' destruction. So God's track record here of punishing attackers. Let's see. Okay. Well, he's just saying that he's going to beat them down. He's going to beat the Assyrians down. I'm going to skip over that. He made this little comparison there about Midian. He said they enter Aeth. Let me see. He made it. He said as when he struck down Midian at the rock of Horeb, and so that might raise a question for you about where is Midian. Well, Midian is down southeast of the Red Sea. I got a little map there, but here's a bigger one. Midian is down on the southeast side of the Red Sea. And what you may remember is, you remember Moses had a father-in-law, Jethro. Jethro was from Midian. Remember, he had gone there, and Moses spent 40 years out there after he had trouble with killing the Egyptian kid or something like that. Then he wound up going and hiding out. He met Jethro. Jethro, I think, was a priest of some kind over in Midian, and Moses, I think, married his daughter. So Midian, but later on, during the period of the Judges, there was trouble with the Midianites. They kept coming into Israel and causing problems, and Gideon was the guy who got picked to solve that problem. I'm just saying that because Midian there's some reputation there about Midian. And he brought it up. All of a sudden, we're looking at the route of march of the Assyrians. They're coming, And like when you pick up the Orange County Register or some newspaper and you say, well, they're in Lodi or Stockton or Bakersfield. That's way up there. I don't have to worry about it. But he's not saying that. They're saying they're like in Mission Viejo or San Juan or Doheny Beach. They're close by. You guys need to start worrying about the Assyrians. They're close. Except that I was using names you might be familiar with, but here are the names they were actually saying. And he started citing a bunch of names, this Aeth, Migron, Michmash. And if you go look at a map, this map kind of shows Jerusalem on it, and it shows you the Jordan River. Remember that Jericho is just right out there where the word Jordan is. That's only 20 miles. But all these towns he's talking about here are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles out of town. And he's saying there's where they're at. The Assyrians are coming. Time to start worrying. And he continues to talk about that. And in fact, he says here, this day they will halt at Nob. And you can see on the map, it's right next to Jerusalem. He he says they can stand out there and shake their fist at the people in Jerusalem. Right there. So Isaiah in verse 33. He said, see the Lord Almighty will lop off the boughs with great power. The lofty trees will be felled. The tall ones will be brought low. He will cut down the forest thickets with an axe. Lebanon will fall before the mighty one. What is he talking about? Well, what he's doing there is picturing the Assyrians are like the trees in Lebanon, which everybody knows are huge. They're wonderful. It's like looking at our big trees that we've got up north. You know, they're huge, they're powerful. No one would ever think there could be any destruction up in Lebanon of all those beautiful forests, those huge trees. But what he's saying is they're going to be brought low. The Lord of God Almighty is going to take off all the good branches. All of that's going to be cut down. And Lebanon is kind of a place where the Assyrians have been hanging out. And he's saying that's all going to fall. I'm going to skip that. Next week, okay, enough? Have I bored you completely on this? Okay, next week, Robert Harvey is going to come back, and he's going to talk to us about Isaiah 11, and what is Isaiah 11 about? I don't know exactly, and I'm not going to steal his thunder, but it has something to do from where will the Christ come. I noticed that Derek today used something from Isaiah 9, the chapter before this one, when he was doing his lesson today. Thought that was good. Should we have a little song to get off the stage here?
Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Stay.